Okay, number one, the calcaneus, also known as the heel bone. The talus, where you start and finish tape jobs for the ankle. The way I find it, if I'm not sure where it's at, dorsiflex your foot. I find the extensor tendons, the tibialis anterior and the extensor digitorum longus. Go right in between and then relax, and I can feel the dome of vertalis. Number three, the navicular. It's this prominent bone here. So if I find her medial malleolus, distal, and then anterior, I'm over a bony prominence. The medial cuneiform, if I find the navicular, and go on top of that, that's where her medial cuneiform is. Her intermediate is here. The intermediate lines up with the second metatarsal. The lateral lines up with the third metatarsal. And then the cuboid lines up with fourth and fifth metatarsal. Metatarsals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Metatarsal 1, metatarsal 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the first phalange is the great toe, also known as the hallux. It has a proximal and a distal phalanx bone. And then toes 2, 3, 4, and 5 have a proximal, intermediate, and distal. Proximal, intermediate, and distal phalanx bone. Now for the medial side, number one, the medial malleolus is the distal end, the bony prominence of the tibia. Number two, we have the calcaneonavicular ligament, also known as the spring ligament. It attaches the calcaneus to the navicular. There's the ligament, and the navicular tubercle is here. The deltoid ligament is underneath the medial malleolus. It connects the tibia to the calcaneus and the tibia to the navicular. It's a triangle-shaped ligament. Again, number four, the navicular tubercle is a bony prominence right here. The medial cuneiform is just anterior to the navicular. If I move her, flex her first metatarsal, my finger is not moving. I'm over the medial cuneiform. Then the first metatarsal is here. The first metatarsophalangeal joint is the joint between the first metatarsal and the phalange. So it's this joint, also known as your foot knuckles. The first phalanx is the first toe. It has a proximal and a distal phalanx bone. Your tibialis posterior is the muscle that goes into the tendon here. Invert your foot a little bit. You can see your tendons start to pop out. Your tibialis posterior comes down, attaches here at the navicular. The flexor hallucis longus is also back here and comes down to the hallucis, the flexor hallucis longus. And then the flexor digitorum longus, same route, and it comes down and splays out to her digits 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then the medial longitudinal arch is here. Okay, for the lateral side, number one, the lateral malleolus, distal end of the fibula. The sinus tarsi is this soft space in here that fills up with swelling and inflammation when there's a ankle sprain. It's a soft space here. The cuboid is found go distal from the malleolus and then anterior. It's just above the base of the fifth. So cuboid is here. The styloid process of the fifth metatarsal is this bump, also known as the base of the fifth metatarsal. The fifth metatarsal is here. The fifth metatarsophalangeal joint is where the metatarsal joint meets the phalange. So the fifth metatarsophalangeal joint is her knuckle of her fifth toe. The fifth phalanx has a proximal, intermediate, and distal phalanx bone. The anterior talofibular ligament is from the talus, real deep, to the fibula, anterior talofibular. The calcaneofibular ligament goes from the fibula to the calcaneus. And then the posterior talofibular goes from the malleolus to the talus in the posterior aspect. Finishing up on the lateral side, you have your peroneus longus. Comes up here from the muscle, the peroneus longus, down into the tendon, and wraps around the bottom of her foot. The peroneus tertius comes this way and attaches at the base of her fifth. Pull up for me. You can barely see it. The peroneus tertius is right here. So peroneus longus, underneath, the peroneus brevis comes to here, and the peroneus tertius comes here. The lateral longitudinal arch goes from the calcaneus up to the head of the fifth metatarsal. Okay, now for the dorsal side, we have the second, third, and fourth metatarsals. We have the second, third, and fourth metatarsophalangeal joints. It's where the phalanges connect to the metatarsal, so the joints. And then for the second, third, and fourth, and fifth, we have the proximal, intermediate, and distal, proximal, intermediate, and distal phalanx bones, proximal, intermediate, distal. Same here, proximal, intermediate, distal. Then you have your intermediate and lateral cuneiforms. The intermediate cuneiform is at the base of the second metatarsal. So you have your first or medial cuneiform, your intermediate cuneiform at the base of the second, and then you have your lateral cuneiform at the base of the third metatarsal. Your cuboid would be over here. The tibialis anterior muscle, dorsiflex for me. I'll hold it up, dorsiflex and hold it up. The tibialis anterior is here, goes down to the navicular. Then you have your extensor hallucis longus right here. It's a nice specimen there. And then you have your extensor digitorum longus. You can see the tendon right there. So tibialis anterior, extensor hallucis longus, and then you have your extensor digitorum longus. Okay. So for the plantar view, number one, the plantar fascia goes from the calcaneal tubercle up to the heads of the metatarsal. It spans the foot and gives it the arch. You have your medial longitudinal arch, your lateral longitudinal arch, your digital transverse arch, which is at the heads, and it goes across transverse, digital transverse arch, and then your proximal transverse arch.